Good evening, everybody. My name is Robert Beckford. I'm going to be moderating this after show discussion. Hope you've all watched the documentary, The Panorama, Is the Church Racist? We are going to do two things this evening. We're going to hear a bit more from some of the contributors to the programme and then invite you to ask questions. The questions we will ask you to write in the chat, and that way we can feed them to the appropriate member of the panel. So without further ado, let me introduce first of all, again, Peterson Feital, Michelle Delves, and Elizabeth Henry. And I want to begin by asking, first of all, Peterson, I know that in the documentary you weren't able to say everything that you wanted to say, and so is there anything that you would like to add that wasn't mentioned in the panorama?
No, at the moment. I think probably I will add as the questions go along, but I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening and for meeting Elizabeth and Michelle virtually, and say to the people who are joining us that it's been a huge privilege to be standing alongside Elizabeth, because all really helped with this amazing woman who, when I heard her story last year on the paper, I just thought, why haven't I heard about her? Oh my God, my life would have been easier, I think. And just to prove that the power of community, because I felt with her story, it's time to have a better conversation, to make a different conversation. And I hope this evening is what we can do together, have a different conversation.
And Michelle.
Hey, yeah, I mean, I can barely say how excited I am to just have taken part in this and to hear just people speaking and being heard. And, you know, I often, when I was in training, I mean, I'd have to second Peterson. Without Elizabeth, I don't even know if I'd ever got to the stage of being ordained as a priest, because that's the most important thing when something like this happens. It's to be fully seen and fully heard. So thank you to Elizabeth. Yeah, and I'm just excited for conversations, real life, down to earth conversations to begin happening. No playing of games, just honest brothers and sisters talking together, yeah.
And Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, thank you for everyone for being here, and thank you for tuning in. And if this program spoke to you, I hope that it helped you, as well as opened up what needs opening up. But what I do want to say, I mean, we talked towards the end about the survival of the church, and Aaron spoke just so realistically and rightly about the task force and what's happening. One of the things I want to say about that is having a task force and having a commission is nowhere near job done. There is nothing done by simply having a task force and a commission, because if that task force has no authority, no autonomy, and no resources, how on earth that task force is supposed to be able to turn this church around, or to help turn this church around, I do not know. I have no idea. But you know that saying, put your money where your mouth is. That's what I want to see from the church. I want to see less of the talk. And, you know, after each one of those examples tonight, Peterson's, Michelle's, and well, we're really sorry for it. And if they'd like to get in contact with us, we'd like to talk to them. We didn't know about it. Quite frankly, that's just not true. That just isn't true. Okay, so it's past now, but let's be clear and let's be real about this. That was not true. They did know. They didn't do anything about it. What I want to see is that we do about it. We stop the talk and do the action, and that's it.
Well, let's continue with that, because in the panorama it was mentioned that there were 160 recommendations from previous reports that hadn't been acted upon. So Peterson, what would you like to see acted upon in relation to your experience, which you know, alongside everything else we heard, was really, you know, gut-wrenching, really. It was saddening. And I'm sure a lot of people watching it would have felt that way. So what do you feel needs to be taken forward in relation to your experience?
I think one of the things that I'd like to see moving forward is practical issues. Like one of the challenges that was for me is, where do I go with my concerns? There is an issue of boundary, of clarity. Where do you take your stuff? You know, so when you take your concern as a trainee curate or as a vicar, once you pass your trainee, so do you speak to your archdeacon, for example, or to your vicar? Is that HR? Is that safeguarding? Because the issue for me has always been the middleman, and who's writing on your blue file, and who's to challenge what's be written about you. This is a mechanism, right? It's about who writes it, who reads it, and who's challenging it. So also it's about empowering the people behind you to ask the questions. So like you pointed out on your own contribution, Robert, is the process in which it's so archaic. Because in no way I should be in a position, or we should ever be in a position that we are cat-mousing. Who do I talk to? Because in my experience, for years, I really definitely felt this was my fault. I had to change my personality, the way that I had to speak, the way that I had to dress. This is so much the opposite of what the gospel of Jesus Christ is about.
Amen.
So you're really walking as a double personality. You don't recognize yourself. I felt like a shell. So realistically is given also the parishioners and the church wardens and the PCC training practically how to spot when something is not right. What is it that is going on here that's systematic and problematic that people need to be aware of? It's not really about the senior leaders who are over there. I used to think, it's from bottom up. Oh, no. It's straight from the top to bottom. No, it's both. This is gonna take everybody to change it together, right? It's heart to heart, mind to mind, and need to need prayers, I feel.
And Michelle, action. What does action mean in terms of your situation?
Action looks like. Sorry, I butted in there, Robert. Could you just repeat the last part of what does action look like?
I was just repeating myself. I was saying, you mentioned quite a few issues in terms of training and ministry. So what does action going forward look like in your situation?
Action going forward to me is a lot more trusting that God can raise people up from many colours and cultures and classes to lead the people of his church. Action for me on the way forward is looking for leaderships, indigenous leaders within the areas. When people of colour come in, allowing us to bring all of us in, because God's called all of us. Somebody spoke in the Panorama about my sister being, a breath of fresh air. And that's the thing. It's like, let people be that. Don't try and manage people that don't need managing, because it just creates mental health issues for them and for us. So I would say action on the way forward. Let's make the Church of England the Church of England, not the Church of Middle or Upper England, but the Church of England. Let's realize that if a Black person gets emotional, it's not because we've got mental health issues. Maybe it's because of how much we love Jesus and how much we want to be obedient to our God. Maybe that's it. Maybe some of us, as Brother Aaron spoke about, have lived broken lives. And so we want to live in a Me Too ministry where we don't float about whiter than white, but we sit next to the broken person and we tell them, me too, but for my God and my people. So
that's right. And also what I'd like to add to that, I think also is really important, because my concern with all this conversation, as always happens, becomes binary, goes the other way, because it is also totally okay. And this is about inclusion. We need everybody, the the white, everybody to be themselves,
Absolutely.
to be flamboyant, to be full of energy. They need us to be who we are, and we need them to be who they are. So we don't want to be in this position that we are dancing around each other, that we can't be ourselves, because this is the opposite of what this conversation is about. We need a different conversation altogether. And this is everybody dancing together, if you feel like it.
Well, let's stay with that metaphor of everybody dancing together as a way of talking about real radical inclusion within the church. And Elizabeth, there's a direct question to you related to this, which is, what would it have taken for you to stay in that job? I think they want you to probably work till you're 90. But, you know, apart from there being a ceiling on how long you can stay in these jobs, what kind of things would you have had to seen and heard to make you think, yes, this is working, this is worth living for, working for?
Well, I probably will be working till I'm 90, Robert, because you know me, activism never ends, does it? So, sadly, I don't have hope that we won't have to do the activism anymore, which means I probably will be working till I'm 90, as you say. But anyway, what would have needed to happen? You know, I was headhunted into that job in the church, and that headhunter chased me for 6 months. And when I finally spoke with her, she told me it was a senior job in a major institution. And I said, well, actually, I'm not looking for a job. And she said to me, at the very end of this chat, she said to me, and the institution is the Church of England. And I said, oh, and she said, oh, are you interested? And I said, no, not interested, but intrigued. And she said, okay, well, we'll take intrigued. Can we take you for a coffee? And that coffee led to me obviously applying for this job. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because at interview, I was asked, when would I know the job would be done? And I said, when you no longer need me or somebody like me doing it. And not because you've decided you don't want to hear me anymore, not because you are so uncomfortable with what I'm saying, but actually because there is not a need for this role. That's when I will consider the job done. So what would it have taken? It would have taken me not having to, for 7.5 years, beg, plead, convince, cajole, challenge, conflict, on and on and on and on. In the Panorama program just now, you all heard 20 reports. Robert, you just referred to Faith in the City.
Yeah.
20 reports, 160 recommendations. Now you tell me, please, somebody explain to me, how do you not know? It is not possible to know. It is not possible to unknow what you know already. If you didn't know, in 35 years of 20 reports and 160 recommendations, then where have you been? What have you been listening to? What have you been hearing? Because you haven't been hearing people like me. And those of you who know me, you know well enough that I will speak truth and I will speak it out. Now, if you're speaking truth constantly and speaking it out, but you're saying the same things again and again and again and again, and you're not seeing, how have you got somebody in this role? There is no resource to it. I said when I was leaving, I believe the church has a will in principle, but not in practice, to eliminate racial injustice within its midst. I'm afraid I've even moved from there in the year that I have left. There is no will in principle or practice. And if I'd have seen a will in both principle and practice, in other words, the recommendations that the Committee for Minority Ethnic Anglican Concerns, the committee I was officer to, the reports that we did, the recommend if I had seen a semblance of, yes, let's talk about how we implement these now. We've got these recommendations. What do we need to do? I have given the way again and again and again and again. Affirmative action as a start. No, there has been that's what it would have taken, in other words, for me to say. One quick thing. Peterson mentioned safeguarding earlier. Let me say something about this, please, if you will. Racial abuse is a safeguarding issue. Racism, and therefore the expression of that, is abuse, and that is a safeguarding issue. The church needs to make racial abuse a safeguarding issue and use the same processes and practices that are used for all safeguarding, because it is why is it safeguarding? Because every time you saw Michelle, you saw Peterson, and there are many, many more, you saw just them reliving their experiences to you all in that Panorama program. It is trauma. This is trauma, and this is what trauma looks like. And this is what happens when people are abused. And it needs to be treated as a safeguarding issue, and it must be treated as a safeguarding issue. Okay.
Michelle.
Robert, can I just respond to, it's just a question that I've seen, and it's really funny because it's coming from somebody anonymous, which is fine, absolutely fine. But the question was, and I knew this would come up, that there's a clip of me on YouTube saying how great my experience was at Cranmer. So there's some points I want to make on that. Firstly, I'm really saddened that after watching such a powerful programme with both of our archbishops admitting that this is a problem, we're not making it up, that somebody would pick this, but I'd like to address that. So what I'd like to say is, one of the things when you start to realise what's happening and you try to speak it out, people make you feel and often talk about being ungrateful. So actually all that YouTube clips proves is that I was never ungrateful. I was always grateful about my calling into God's church. I was always grateful about the community that I lived amongst as I studied. What I wasn't grateful for was the way that my authentic voice was silenced. And it took counselling that my diocese provided for me to unpick what had happened to me, because this stuff is so complex and it's so deeply damaging. So what I would say is that's my question to why it differs. And my greatest wish would be that that person could have put their name to it, because there's a lack of transparency that we need to change the script. Yep. And so, yeah, that's all I wanted to say. What I say on that video, I still stand by. I love the people I studied with. But at the beginning of the video, I say, although it has been a difficult time, so even in there, it was overshadowed. So, yeah, I just wanted to respond to that.
But let's also be honest about this, Michelle. They always, whether it's a theological college, a seminary, or a university, there's a tendency to get black and brown people to be in the promotional videos, no matter what their experience is.
Absolutely. There's loads of that. Absolutely. Yeah. You'd be amazed how many things I've been asked to lecture on since all this has come out, which I've refused, because it's not about tokenism. It's not about changing the flower. It's about, let's change the soil. Some of the flowers aren't flourishing, so we need to change the soil. Let's not attack the flowers that are telling you this nearly killed me. Yeah. You know, let's look at this problem that the highest people in our church have already owned. A good friend of mine, Bishop Graham King, wrote Faith in the City. It had the answers 35 years ago. This is not what I said on a YouTube video after being traumatized for 2 years in Cranmer. We've missed the point if that's what we're going to start picking up on. And that's all I wanted to say on that.
Let's start dealing with some of these radical changes that need to take place. Some of the questions ask in a variety of ways. What kind of training do people need to change the way in which clergy operates on the ground, and also the people in leadership? Peterson, what kind of training do you think needs to happen? What kind of education?
Thank you. I would suggest that 3 things that needs to happen. Of course, there are recommendations right now about teaching kids from schools about Black history. I think there's very little about Latin American history and the liberation theology, but this, of course, we're talking right here in a room with a lot of theologians and theological students, right? So it is specific. But I think the church needs also to learn to borrow from what other organization outside itself, its orbit, is doing. There are wonderful resources about inclusion and diversity and actually mental health issue impacts on racism that it can be outsourced for wonderful companies. So then it's a question of resources. One thing that I would say though, what I would really highly recommend is that this does not become a ticking box exercise. I know you've got to go for training for racism and safeguarding, all done 6 hours. This is about living the experience with one another. It's about getting out of your church and mingling with your community. It's about including those who are in your own church and those who aren't there. You asking the question, why are they not here? And trying to really understand. Because I've said this one day to the press, and I might not become very popular by saying this here, but I will say it because I'm so bored of not saying what I think, which is one of the problems, because being me, well, this is one of the criticism, because people always say I'm too Brazilian. I'm not too Brazilian in that sense, because actually my family from Brazil, they'd say that I'm the least Brazilian that you know. But I'm Peterson, I'm like Elizabeth. I speak out. If I don't like something, I have a face that if I don't like it, you can read it. You know, that's what it is. So a practical thing, I always love the Pope, what the Pope does, you know, growing up in Brazil. You know, you go into Brazil, if he kisses the soil, that's what he does. I always thought a practical thing would be, can the bishops and the archbishops clear out 3 months of the diary and visit the communities around the UK? Very simply, sit down with the community and listen from the experiences there.
Yeah.
That is the most important task to be done right now. Take the clergy out and just do it. So that would be my second thought. And the third thing I would say from practical experience, if you are a vicar working in a church and you have someone who is from a different background, you know, it is okay to ask, what is like being Brazilian? What is like being Caribbean? Don't be afraid to ask. It is okay, because you know what? We want to tell you. But it is difficult for you to just be assuming what is that like, because you don't know what it's like. In the same way that we don't know what's like being you. So a practical thing is simply ask. And you know what? And sometimes just knock on our door for a cup of tea and lunch without an agenda about work would be just lovely. You know, just that.
Yeah.
Relationship is just that.
Yeah. I mean, a related question to that, which has come in on the Q&A, if I can summarize it and build on what you said, Peterson, and throw this to Michelle and also Elizabeth, is there several comments have said, well, does the leadership in the Church of England have the theological tools, the cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence to actually make the changes in the first place? I mean, are these people so, I was going to say unable, ill-equipped, that actually they can't make the changes? Isn't that the kind of cycle that the Church of England has got itself into? The report, but it doesn't have the tools, the mechanisms or the personnel to actually implement them. Michelle?
I would say that, you know, there are complexities here, but the most complex thing is that the very thing that the church needs to change those things are the people that they're creating barriers for. So, you know, there are people out there who have amazing things to do with the church, for the church, very powerful things. You know, I do not have a doctorate. I have a degree, but I'm a highly intelligent woman who has many questions that I want to ask and ponder. And, you know, and there are many, many more people like me. So what I would say is that this is what I was saying about, you know, we have to be careful that we don't trot into elitism and start holding up education as an idol, because Jesus is our boy. You know, God is the daddy and we are the children, every single one of us. And so until we are a church where every child that walks this earth, if they have a calling, gets treated the same, then we need to keep looking at that honestly and openly. And I would also say, for me, the conversations I've been having recently, and even in prayer, I said that flippantly earlier, we need to change the script. This is not about an academic discourse. It's about people's lives. It's about people being wounded and then left to deal with those wounds as though they were self-inflicted. So what I would say is, when I say change the script, let's rock it up a bit. Let's dare to believe that our amazing God could pick up a dual heritage Black woman from Bradford who's poor, not quite as well educated as most of her peers, and do something amazing through her. Because I believe Peterson talked about relationship. And the thing with a lot of the people that I'm speaking to and the people who've been wounded during training, they're the absolute masters at relationship. So I love scholars, and we need scholars in our church, but we need lovers too.
Thank you. Thank you. Elizabeth, you gestured in your contribution to the programme that they don't have the wherewithal to make the changes. Do you still stand by that?
Yeah, I do. And I want to say something here as well, because I think I've seen that, and I know enough laity, including myself, by the way, who are all a part of this. This is all of us. And when we say we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, we're all members of the same body. This is all of us. Every single one of us, our laity, our clergy, all of us. And there are many, and some that I know are on this call right now, laity, who have experienced overt racism within this church and have sought solace for that racism and gotten on. But I just want to talk a little bit in relation to what your original question, Robert, around training. So look, you know, I don't want to go into how long you and I could wax lyrical about how long we've been doing training, race awareness, racial diversity, unconscious bias, We go on and on and on and on and on. You know what? You cannot train it in people, and you cannot train it out of people. It's where people's heart is. It's where their beliefs are. So for me, one of the things that we've done for many, many, many years, and as long as 30 odd years I've been really activist and campaigning around this, we always look at racism from the perspective of expecting Black and brown people to eliminate the very thing that they are oppressed by, which they are oppressed by white people. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then on top of that, we re-traumatize Black and brown people constantly by saying, please tell us how we oppress you. Tell us how we oppress you. Tell us what we're doing to you. And then we tell them, well, you know, don't say anything about this because it's going to do this or going to do that. Here's what we need to do. For me, what I believe we need to do. We need to start from the beginning, and the beginning is white supremacy. White supremacy, the ideology of superiority and inferiority. And this has been the inculcation within Europe and within this country from time. And unless we address this issue of white supremacy and the expression of white supremacy being the power that is exercised over others, Black and brown people, which is what the culture has been encultured to, we're not really addressing these issues because we keep going over. I go back again, you talked about the Faith in the City report, Robert. We could go on and on and on with these reports until it is faced, white supremacy is faced up to. That is now expressed in what we call whiteness. The backdrop to that, white supremacy. This belief in superiority. Peterson said, I was told, oh, your accent, people can't understand it. I cannot tell you the hundreds of people that tell me that, Elizabeth, they keep telling me that I need to speak properly, that I need to change the way I speak, that people can't understand me. And I fear that they're going to try and get rid of me because they say that I can't be understood. It's the same old, same old, same old. Deal with white supremacy. Have white people deal with their white supremacy and their whiteness, which they visit and express upon Black and brown people. And then we can start talking about how do we now go from here? But as long as we keep denying that, or as long as we keep ignoring it, or as long as we keep refusing, that we won't face up to that because we don't like the ugly truth. We don't like the uncomfortable truth. we're not going to get anywhere. So it's not about training it in or training it out.
Yeah.
It's not about training it in or training it out. It's about addressing white supremacy in the church and how that is then played out in terms of power, in terms of the theology, in terms of the practice on the ground.
Absolutely.
So
and it runs through all of that, Robert.
Peterson, then help our viewers then understand how we're going to dismantle this.
Let me explain. I think let me explain a little bit of the mechanism of this, because I think what Elizabeth is saying, it is absolutely spot on. Absolutely. But let me explain how these things work in practicality from my experience. So, of course, Panorama only touched a little bit about my story. My story was not only one incident. It carried on for 10 years,
no,
right? So this was ongoing, right? But really, what has happened, what was the trigger, was the fact that the conversation that occurred many, many times was the realization that I was, that's how it was, is that I was very well educated, more so than this particular individual. And that was a very difficult realization. So when I started not understanding this oppression, that your English is not very good, your preaching is not very coherent, or I don't understand you. And then I start pushing back by saying, well, my position always has been, there are people here on the call who have worked with me for years. There's one thing that I'm always very open about is, I don't claim to know everything. Please tell me where I am wrong and teach me. I'm a learner. I love learning. So I don't pretend to know what I don't know. And the pushback began because of that oppression. And then that's the whiteness, I suppose, the white supremacy began to occur in that pushback, that suddenly I was not seen as this, which felt to me, that was never said, let me just be very clear, because I don't like putting words in people's mouths. It was never said this, but it was the shift that I was not any longer a charity Black person to be given attention to, but suddenly I was someone equally on the same platform, equally or more so capable to engage theologically or academically, and that was just not acceptable, was a threat. And then the attack began.
Yeah.
And that is really difficult to explain that mechanism, because I wasn't trying to be more academically or more clever or more anything. I just like studying, I just did it. So this is really hard until you really push back. And then you feel, okay, this really isn't about any of that. You do feel it's your fault. You do get the trauma that Elizabeth is referring to. And the safeguarding is appalling because you don't know what is happening. So anyway, so that is how really some of the story unfolded. Mm. You're not clever enough. You don't speak well enough, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because these things were said 30, 40 years ago about African Caribbean people and West African people. So
absolutely,
they are controlling ideologies, aren't they? To say, you know, you're not one of us. It's a way in which they other, you know. So,
it's the otherness. It's always about the otherness. Yeah. So inclusion is not an inclusion. So this is what I meant about empowering what Elizabeth is perhaps trying. What I got from what Elizabeth was saying is empowering the congregations, the PCCs and church wardens to understand how this work for us. Mm. You know, suddenly I was removed from preaching. Suddenly I was not on the rota so much. Suddenly I was not thriving. So there was never a question, why was it thriving? Now he isn't. It was just an accepted reality and no one was asking. And what hurts.
Yeah, quite a few questions have come in about the gagging orders.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
That's something
Yeah.
Michelle and maybe Elizabeth want to address. Go ahead, Elizabeth, and then back to you, Michelle. But people are asking about these gagging orders and what should be done.
Okay, so three things. Can I just hold the gagging orders just for a second? There's a couple of things that have been said in the chat. Okay, so Mel was saying that she's white working class and how can she, you know, what can she do? I'm going to say this right up front. The first thing that you can do, Mel, and it's not specifically for you, Mel, it's for everybody who is sat here as a white person who is saying, what can I do? You can start by having those conversations with your white counterparts. That's where you can start. You can start by saying, I'm uncomfortable with this. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. But what I know is we need to do something. What I know is that we need to own this. So you could start with those conversations. You don't have to know how to do it. And then who was it? Somebody else has put in the conversation. I'm trying to find it. Oh gosh, I've lost it. It's gone, I'm afraid. I wanted to answer something that somebody else had said in there. But anyway, for a second, let me just come back to the gagging orders. What's the question, Robert?
The question is, you mentioned in the documentary the fact that there are these other stories, other incidents, and people have had to sign gagging orders in order to not talk about it. Basically, it happens across many industries, not just with the Church of England. And so the question is, you know, what should be done about that? Should the church have a different policy, because it is the church and truth is important? So is that actually a sign of its weakness?
Is the gagging order a sign of its weakness?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the gagging order is a sign. I don't know about a sign of weakness, but it's definitely a sign of cover-up. It's definitely a sign of we're not facing up to this. And so, yeah, we will, you know, we'll give you a settlement, but you're going to sign a non-disclosure. And the non-disclosure, as I said in the program, is actually just a way of silencing. And the issue about that, of course, as I've already laid out, is it's not dealing with it. And it's leaving that person exposed and not supported. But more important, it's not dealing with anything. And basically what it's also telling us is what the church is far more concerned about is its reputation. So as long as we cover this up, our reputation stays intact. And that's what it's telling you. It is telling you their intent. Their intent is not to deal with it. And simply also back to what I said earlier about white supremacy, the element that I'd missed out there as well is power. Edmund Burke said, power is never surrendered willingly. And quite frankly, we've got to be honest about these things. This privileged white leadership, what is commonly called in the church pale, male and stale, which it is actually the concern quite clearly there, and we have to have this level of honesty, is, are you ready? Are you willing to release and relinquish some of that power? That's the question, and that's the question that they need to answer. But it's the question that I believe they're not.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's quite alarming, and it suggests that if the church is incapable, then maybe another body needs to address it. And a couple of people have mentioned in the chat that should there be an independent inquiry? Should it be left to government to look at racism within the Church of England? Because if Elizabeth is being prophetic and is saying it isn't going to change, do we need another agency to push for change? Michelle?
I would say, please, God, no. Because you know what? Inquiry. It's reminding me of when I worked in the field of refuge. It's exactly the same as when you're dealing with covert abuse. It's there, people admit it. You have an inquiry. How do we deal with it? You spend thousands and thousands of pounds. You waste time. You get the results. 10 years later, it's worse. You get another. So I would say, please, God, no more inquiries. What I would say is exactly what my sister Elizabeth said there. Let's start walking the walk, maybe. Let's start daring to believe that whether we as the Church of England want to accept this change or not, the church still belongs to God, and it is God's only plan. So ultimately, I agree with what Elizabeth said. The church at the moment doesn't feel fit for purpose because it's not safe for some of its people. But what I would say is that the way we can begin to make it fit for purpose is letting everybody have a voice. Let everybody, not just, invite them to the table, but give them a voice. Stop having meetings about us, without us, because it's really disempowering. Yeah. So, I'd say we need to change the script. We need to change the soil. We need to shake it up a bit as a church.
Peterson and then Elizabeth. About this idea of, and a lot of people are saying no. I think the Sewell inquiry has kind of made us a little bit sceptical of any kind of inquiry that this government's going to oversee anyway.
Did you say the sewage inquiry?
Oh, sorry.
The sewage inquiry.
Well, the Sewell inquiry. So I mean,
sorry.
How do you feel about that, Peterson? Do you think that would have really would make a difference if there was?
I personally feel if people are in danger and not safe, we need whatever it takes to make people safe. Yeah. If that involves bringing people from outside to look into it, so that be it. That is my personal view on the matter, because it can't carry on as it is. But what I want to say is, in my experience with how it's been, the program. So I'm referring factually, because I have to be factual for all sorts of reasons, legal reasons, lawyer and everything else. The program talks about me raising the concern a number of times, right? And I just want to say that in that period of me raising the concern, the healing that I got was having had someone right towards the end of me leaving, as it were, who listened and who did the right thing. It doesn't take much for someone willing to take the plunge with you and say, you know what? There may not be enough evidence in the blue file, may not be enough this or that, may not be, but there is a story. Because what you find with survivors of abuse and racial stuff is racial bullying is always complicated because it's always contextual. It's always contextual. Elizabeth knows this. But what you're going to find is a way of, this is a practical thing for people listening, is that stories of abuses, they don't tend to disappear. They tend to be the same throughout the years. They don't change. They may go quiet, but they come back, right? And it's someone to listen and to wield his willingness to go to the senior staff with you, which was on my case, and say, there is something wrong here, we need to do something about it. In my case, whatever. But my question to the senior staff and to the bishops is being one, can you decide something over protocol and procedure above what is right? Because Jesus did. He threw the tables at the temple. Because in my case, in your case, Michelle, in so many others, it would not take my child, who's 12 years old, to make a decision what's wrong and right. So they have to be brave and throw some of the procedures and protocol out of the window to make what is right. And it's simple as that. It's simple as that.
Yeah. Michelle, sorry, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I've just made a few notes to try and condense this. Okay, so there's been a lot of talk in the chat about about the fact there shouldn't be an independent tribunal. I've got something to say in relation to that. I agree with what they're saying in the chat. No, because I'm afraid usually those independent tribunals are made up of the same establishment people that are leading the church, that are maintaining the status that we have right now. So here's what I say: disestablish, four synonyms. That's it. Disestablished, restart, rewind. For us, what I would say for Black and brown people, in the words of the great Bob Marley, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. We do not need and must not keep begging, please, please, oppressor, will you recognize us? Please, oppressor, will you allow us to have a little place at the table, no matter how small? Emancipate ourselves. That's what I've got to say. There's been a lot of talk about allies in the chat. I've got to say something about this allies. I mentioned power before, and this is a personal thing. So this is how I feel about it. I have a big problem with people talking about white allies. Why do I have a problem with that? With the very idea of white allies. To choose to be an ally is a very, very powerful thing to do. You have got so much power to say, I'm going to be your ally to help you relieve the problem that you have. Well, guess what? It isn't our problem. We're suffering the consequences of your racism. It isn't our problem. So I do have a problem with this idea of allies. I think, and I would much prefer that people said, we will be your co-peers. That's what we agree. Not your allies. You're not allying us with a problem that you have created or that you are a part of.
That's a really good point. And maybe that's something we can think about in terms of looking at what's going to happen in a couple of days' time, because there'll be a report that comes out on Thursday from the Church of England. Its initial findings and recommendations for the next group to deal with. What do you want to see in that Commission's report on Thursday, Michelle? What do can you pinpoint us to two things that you say would lead to that radical shake-up? That
I can tell you, I'd like to see truth and repentance. That'd be refreshing. That's what I'd like to see. I don't need to go any further than that.
Somebody just mentioned, sorry to cut you, as the Jamaicans say, sorry to cut you, but somebody's mentioned several times in the chat that they don't think the church has a proper theology of repentance.
Racism is a sin. It's a sin, and we keep forgetting that. And I forgot that. I was so broken. I forgot that, but it's a sin. And so, we are not just sat here as people of black and black. God is for us all. And so it's true what Elizabeth said there as well about, I am sick of going cap in hand. My God sent me to serve his people, and I will do that. I will do that. I've always done it, and I'll continue to do that. What I'd like to see is a church that actually fully embraces mine and my brothers and sisters' giftedness, because it's no coincidence that at this very time, God has raised up prodigals outside the very established church and then sent us in, because he sent us in because we, and I would say it is binary. I would say there's lots of working class people as well who just speak the truth naturally. There's no discourse. There's no trying to put the right spin on it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And that's what we need. We need a church full of people who know wrong is wrong and right is right. We need leaders who, maybe could stop making statements and really repent. Because I know when I'm convicted of something, repentance takes me, So that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see people like me and Peterson and Alwyn and Augustine and all my brothers and sisters who've been either told we couldn't speak or coerced in such a clever way that we dared and anyway be allowed to speak. I'd like people to trust us, to know that we are not savages. We have not been sent to bring down the church. We love the church. We are the church. And I'll stop now because I could go on all night, but yeah.
But that's fantastic. I mean, we've got truth and repentance. Peterson, what would you like to see? What two items would you like to see on that in the paper that's going to be presented this week?
I'm a person of process and practicalities, so I would like to see a clear deadline for when something practical is going to happen. For instance, throughout the panorama, we are looking into this. So the problem that I have with all those statements that were taken, which is the right of reply, is that a lot of them was taken back to our hands. We have spoken to these people, to us, and then, for you to go and take this step. The reality is, I'm leaving university credits. I'm gonna pay for the lawyer to help me with that. I want some practical issues coming out of that report, saying for the clergy who are coming forward, who are broke and leave university credit, we are gonna pay for lawyers. We're gonna pay for legal representation. They need to support that. So that's a practical thing. Where do we get financial support, legal support, if we're gonna do that? They need to meet that requirement. So the second thing would be, where do we go where the lay people actually, I want to talk about lay people, because this is very focused on our story. Panorama is very focused on the story of the clergy. But what happens to the lay people? I want to hear the stories of the lay people. What have they experienced? Where do they go? How are they going to report this? Because we, inverted commas, have had a safety net in some ways, although I didn't, because I know Elizabeth existed. But I want to know their stories too. How did that affect? I want to see that on the report.
I think it's a really good point, because there have been quite a few comments that have come in from lay people identifying with your experience and saying that they share.
I haven't seen all the comments because I've been focused.
Because they're leaders who they can speak to.
But we've got lots of the, sorry, Robert, because I was thinking this throughout the whole process of my experiences. Most of the energy of the Church of England comes from the lay people, comes from the communities, comes from people leading soup kitchens and everything else. What are they experiencing? Because if the leadership are modeling this behavior, so who else is picking up on those behavior? I want to see that in the report. How do they report that?
We've got time for a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to wrap up at 1:15 as planned. So I just want Elizabeth to tell us, first of all, what you see as 2 items that need to be on that shopping list later on this week.
Affirmative action. And by that, I do not mean positive action. I mean affirmative action. I mean that in the same way that the church has done for women priests, since women are allowed in the episcopacy now, is exactly the same. And the nonsense about, well, the law prevented women, there is no law preventing black and brown. We already know that. It's not law, it's people that are preventing it. It's those who are already there, who are holding on to what they've got, who are preventing it. So they need to absolve some of that. I want acknowledgement. I want to see that it covers from the colleges. Actually, I want to see that it covers from the time a person, now this is for clergy, from the time a person hears the call and then goes to seek somebody to help them to say, I'm hearing a call to ordained ministry. That whole process from that moment is revamped. There's too much to be able to explain in all of that, but that whole process is wrought with racist unjustness within it. From there through to the colleges, through to ordination, through to curacy, through to incumbency, and so on. So all of that needs revamping. Acknowledgement and acceptance of responsibility. The responsibility is on the part of the leadership predominantly of this church to say, to own up, to take responsibility, to confess, and then to say, we will move forward from here. Not to stand performing at a synod saying, I'm ashamed of my whiteness.
No.
That gets us nowhere.
Yeah.
Be ashamed of your whiteness, be ashamed of it, then do something about it.
Yeah. A lot of people have texted in to say that they are truly amazed by your bravery and your courage for speaking out. And I'm not sure how best to process that set of questions, because I think that what people aren't aware of is that there's always a cost. You've all been through a degree of trauma as a consequence of this. And I'm just wondering how you feel the healing needs to take place, both individually and collectively. In the few minutes that we've got left, if we can signpost how the church itself is going to deal with this trauma, because we've got an idea of what needs to be in the report, but there's a kind of spiritual dimension to this as well, isn't there, as well as the psychological dimension. Michelle?
Yeah, I would say we need to stop dressing it up and then dressing it down. This big, ugly thing is real all the time to people who are living it. So I would say that. I would say, for instance, like, you know, Peterson just quickly talked about his experience. I'm not going to go into mine, but I spoke about in great depth to many, you know, leaders, and I've got a great relationship with some of the leaders. But nonetheless, even though this thing has been admitted, still in training in front of my peers, my training leader said that my training had been withheld because my mum and my brother were ill. And I felt offended, because it's like, we've already got to the truth of why that happened. And so it's really, that in itself is a sense of, that's my mum and my brother, don't use them. So let's just get real. Let's stop admitting it behind closed doors and then backtracking. Let's just move forward. Let's get people like Elizabeth and the many other people who've gone before us, and let them really speak into this. Let's stop this spin and the discourse and just start talking, because God's got us. It doesn't matter what the church thinks or anybody. God has got us, and enough is enough. And we either fall down or build up, but we can't go forward like this anymore. We just can't.
One of the things that people say constantly to me, who come to me, and I am walking alongside multiple people right now, right across the church, both laity and ordained. And one of the things that I hear again and again and again is people saying, Peterson said it himself or again tonight, is that opportunity to talk this out. Michelle said it when she came to me a few years ago, the opportunity to be heard. So one of the things that could happen and should be a space,
absolutely,
where people who have experienced racism within this church can go to, can talk it out, and can express it. A safe space, a space that they can trust. And that's a start. That is a start, that the church funds that space, that the church both provides, doesn't necessarily need to provide the people. That I think there's enough of us that could do that. Provides the space and the funds to be able to offer that to people. Start hearing and listening to what people are saying.
Absolutely. And just, can I just say something really quickly? What I'd say to Elizabeth, right? Something just clicked in my heart then. It wasn't even the fact that we were just heard. Elizabeth was unafraid to hear us. So she listened. And when my voice raises, which it does because I'm half African, she didn't think I was being aggressive or over emotional. She realized I was talking about something that was close to my heart. And it's these kinds of things that will make these conversations easy. I might speak a bit louder and gesture a bit more, but I'm not aggressive. It's just who I am as a character. And the other thing, just quickly, there's a phrase, and one of my best friends said it, so I'm not judging the person who put it in the chat, but they talked about, you know, in Christ we should be colorblind. No! That makes me feel as though my color is so offensive that people have to just not see it. So in Christ we should be full color and loving each other regardless. So I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
And Peterson.
Thank you. I have been leading a mental health charity for a number of years now, where I look after the mental health well-being of creatives. And it's been quite an experience, because I sit down with people who vary from suicide to manic depressive all the way through. And being able to sit with them and recognizing that I have been as broken as they are is being really quite something. And I'm just going to be honest. I've slept better the day that I finished my last position with the church. I slept for 10 hours and I cried, and I'm going to probably cry now, hours, because I am absolutely full of trauma and I don't know how to move on. I really don't know how to, because obviously I'm going to be told I'm lying. I'm going to be told all those things all over again. And that's okay, because I've made that decision and that's fine. So how am I going to heal? I'm going to be healing with with myself and God. But the footage tonight on the on the film of me dancing like a crazy lunatic, I have to say, I want that man back. And that man has gone. And this is what pains me the most, is that I saw that, and I don't see what that's gone.
Sure.
And I'm really praying that I can hear with you guys, you know, and I know some friends are here. And what can the church do for me? I don't know. I honestly don't know, because I've given them everything I possibly could. But I am still willing to walk with them and tell them once again, this is how we could do better, because I love, but I tell one thing that I don't want though, because we've got to go. I don't want this to turn into let's shame all the white people in the church either, because that's not true. I don't want this to become an exercise against another group of people, because that is wrong and is equally racist. This is not what this is. This is about including everybody in Christ.
Absolutely.
And that's what I want. So let's do this together. That's my hope.
Let's stop being afraid of conflict.
Yeah.
Because do you know Daniela Strickland, right? I love that phrase. She said a phrase and it stayed with me. It's kept me sane. And it was that peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice. And we are not conflict averse, because through conflict comes peace and reconciliation and repentance. And so that's what I would say.
On that note, to be just to our panel and also the people who have participated, we're going to have to bring things to a close. I really want to thank everybody for tuning in and participating. We've had loads of questions. We could spend another couple of hours and get through them. And I want to thank again our very distinguished and prophetic and powerful panelists and for their honesty and integrity. And we will continue to support them and pray for them, for their healing, for their ministry. And that this is truly, we're going to pray that this is truly a Kairos moment, that it is a moment where things radically change for the better. So thank you again to Elizabeth Henry, Michelle, Reverend Michelle, I always pronounce your surname wrong, Delves. There you go. And Peterson Feital. Thank you so much for participating in this, and we will watch eagerly to see what happens with the report going forward this week. Thank you all again, and thank you everybody for tuning in. But
thank you so much.
Our time is up. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.